The air in the terminal was thick with the smell of stale coffee and hurried ambition. I was 23 and working the graveyard shift as a ticket agent, dreaming of getting my degree and getting my mom out of our cramped apartment. My hands, calloused from years of side jobs, checked passports with the kind of precision that made supervisors nod. That night, a man walked up to my counter, smooth suit, eyes that held the cold glint of old money, and a smile that felt too practiced. He introduced himself as Mr. Sterling and asked for a window seat, as if the sky were a private theater reserved for people who could afford silence. He spoke in confident loops, the kind of voice that made strangers believe they were the only ones who mattered. He asked about schedules like a man reading sheet music, patient and precise. When he handed me a tip I should have refused, I kept it because, for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. He started coming by every week, always first class, always charming, always asking about my mom, who had begun dating an older man named Arthur. Arthur was secretive but generous. He bought my mother an antique sapphire necklace from a dealer in the city, and the way she smiled with it on made the apartment feel less like a holding cell. Seeing her happy eased a weight in my chest. Sterling said he admired the way Arthur looked after people like my mother. I told Sterling small things, the harmless details of a son watching his mother. That is how he got what he wanted, slowly and under the guise of care. The work Sterling offered me was presented as a favor. Discreet checks. He called them, verify names, times, and quiet confirmations that a man had indeed left a building. At first, it felt like adult responsibility, not theft or spying. He said he was building a portfolio of reliable consultants and offered me pay that made my college dream feel possible. The tasks were simple: glance at manifests, note a door's maintenance schedule, record a concierge's odd absence. I rationalized the tasks as trivial, the kind of small chores a decent man might do for a mentor. I liked the validation. I enjoyed being trusted. He complimented my instincts and made me feel like I had value. Still, there were red flags. Sterling preferred cash upgrades and prepaid booking cards. He asked about Arthur's schedule with an intensity that sat wrong in my gut. He noticed which floors Arthur's elevator pinged and asked about the times the building's security flashed amber. When I pushed for why, he always smiled and said, "Investment diligence." I wanted to trust him. He rewarded my trust with mentorship, with a line of praise that became intoxicating. One night, after handing Sterling a passport, he slipped a slim business card across the counter with his number on it and a handwritten note. "Call me if you ever want out of this grind." I folded that card into my wallet like a promise. I started sleeping with plans again, imagining tuition paid, the house reclaimed, my mom set free from worry. Months later, small things started to align like the gears of a clock slipping into place. I noticed how Sterling timed his visits to Arthur's service entrance. I saw him sketching in the margins of a travel magazine, as if plotting routes on paper instead of reading advertisements. I felt a prickle of fear, but pushed it down because fear would cost me the chance. Then, the night the theft happened, I watched a shadow take what belonged to us, and I realized I had handed someone the keys. The call came while I was half asleep on the couch, my uniform shirt still on, the TV casting blue light over the living room. My mom's voice was raw, trembling in a way I hadn't heard since my father died. She said Arthur's penthouse had been robbed. Not just some break-in or kids grabbing electronics, this was something targeted, something surgical. The thieves went straight for a hidden safe behind a paneled wall, a safe Arthur never talked about, a safe even my mom only learned about by accident. Inside it were bearer bonds, cash, and documents worth more than entire neighborhoods. $27 million. Gone. And the sapphire necklace she adored, the one she said made her feel like she mattered, had vanished with it. Arthur wasn't yelling when I arrived. He wasn't pacing or furious. He was quiet, too quiet. He stared at the shards of glass on the floor like they were hieroglyphs revealing a truth he had always feared. He barely looked at my mom. When she tried to touch his arm, he flinched like she hurt him, but like he no longer trusted what her touch meant. The police were already there, combing the place, asking questions in clipped tones. One officer asked how the thieves knew exactly where the safe was, how they bypassed the biometric keypad, and how they got into a penthouse with a doorman and 2 security cameras. Arthur's eyes flicked to my mother as if her presence suddenly fit too perfectly into a puzzle he didn't want to solve. When the officers left, Mom collapsed into my chest, sobbing so hard she shook. She kept saying, "He thinks I did it, Melvin. He thinks I let someone in." I tried to calm her, but inside me, something cold and sharp was digging in. The robbery happened 2 nights after Sterling asked me about Arthur's security schedule. 2 nights after I stupidly, blindly trusted a man who slipped $100 bills between his lies. I stepped into the hallway and dialed Sterling, straight to a disconnected tone. I tried again. Same thing. I texted him. Nothing. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped into my spine. The perfect mentor. The generous advisor. The man who seemed to know exactly how to nudge my ambition. He had disappeared the moment the money did. Guilt pressed in hard, heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Every helpful detail I'd given him now looked like a loaded gun I'd handed to a stranger. If the police found out, if anyone traced my conversations with him, I wouldn't look like a victim, I'd look like an accomplice. The thought nearly took the air out of my lungs. I sat at my kitchen table long after Mom went to bed, staring at my laptop screen, hands trembling as I opened my airline employee portal. Accessing passenger manifests wasn't fully illegal, but it wasn't something I should be doing for personal reasons. Still, I typed in the name William Sterling. Nothing. No records. No history. I tried another spelling. Nothing. I tried the passport number he'd once flashed at me when he was being charming and performative. What came up wasn't his name. It was a placeholder, a red flag in the system used for aliases tied to fraudulent travel. The name Sterling wasn't real. Not even close. My stomach twisted. The man I'd trusted didn't exist. And the man who did had used me with precision. But what I didn't know was that the robbery was only the first step in a much larger trap already closing around my family. Detective Ramirez found me before I found my courage. I was at my check-in counter, pretending to focus on a passenger's passport while my mind churned through the wreckage of the last 48 hours. When my shift ended, she was already waiting, leaning against a column with her arms crossed. Her hair pulled back into a practical bun, her eyes sharp enough to cut through concrete. She flashed her badge without ceremony and said my name with a tone that made my stomach drop. We walked to a quiet corner of the terminal, the hum of rolling suitcases and distant boarding calls filling the silence between her questions. She started simple, where I was the night of the robbery, whether I had contact with Arthur recently, and if I knew anything about the safe. I answered carefully, trying to sound calm, but my hands kept shaking, and Ramirez saw every tremor. She asked how often I handled high-profile passengers. I explained the basics of my job, trying to hide the panic rising in my throat. She nodded, unimpressed. Then she leaned forward slightly. "Your mother's boyfriend has been robbed," she said. Very specific security knowledge was used. And here you are, nervous, evasive, giving me textbook answers. So let's try a better question. Has anyone asked you for information about Arthur's routines? My pulse hammered so loudly I thought she could hear it. I swallowed. Not really. I mean, just casual stuff. Her eyes narrowed. Casual stuff like what? I felt myself cracking. My voice thinned. Just a business acquaintance. Someone I met here. Nothing major. We talked sometimes. Her eyebrows lifted, slowly, deliberately. A business acquaintance. At the airport. Who asked about your mother's wealthy boyfriend? Sounds pretty major to me. I tried to defend myself, stumbling through excuses, insisting the man never hinted at anything criminal. Ramirez watched me unravel with the patience of someone who had seen 100 guilty men and 1,000 terrified innocent ones. Then she said quietly, "Melvin, we already know someone inside the airport helped the thief. I need to know if you were used, or if you're involved." Then she pulled out a glossy print from her folder. A grainy still from a security camera. A man in a suit walking through the terminal the night of the robbery, carrying a small black case. Even blurred, even poorly lit, I recognized the posture, the stride, the tilt of the head. It was Sterling. My lungs froze. I felt my throat close. You know him, Ramirez said. Not a question. A statement. So I'll ask you one last time. Are you an accomplice or a victim of manipulation? The words broke whatever dam I had left. I told her everything. The consulting job. The questions about Arthur's schedule. The prepaid cards. The little lies Sterling wrapped in charm. My voice cracked twice. My hands shook uncontrollably by the time I finished. She listened, face unreadable, then exhaled through her nose. You should be arrested right now, she said bluntly. But I believe you didn't understand what you were part of. Not fully. A lifeline or a warning. She lowered her voice. Here's the deal. You work with me. Fully. You tell me every detail, how he walked, how he talked, how he booked flights, what he carried, what he noticed. If you hold back anything, even a breath, I'll know. And then you won't be walking out of this terminal. I nodded, terrified but relieved. For the first time, someone knew the truth I'd been choking on. But what I didn't realize was that helping Ramirez would make me the next target in Sterling's long-planned revenge. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother crying into her hands, Arthur's cold stare, and Sterling's perfect smile. Mug, polished, rehearsed. Guilt had fused itself to my ribs. If I didn't help Ramirez now, I'd be living under that weight for the rest of my life. Ramirez set me up in a cramped back office at the precinct, a room with humming fluorescent lights and a coffee machine that tasted like burnt wires. She handed me a tablet loaded with passenger records and said, "You know airports better than anyone on this case. Follow his patterns. Criminals are creatures of habit." So I did. I pulled every flight I had ever checked him into, plus the ones before I even knew him. I dug through the digital footprints like I was sifting sand for gold. Sterling always paid for seat upgrades with cash, crisp bills, nothing traceable. But his online bookings? Those were made with a prepaid debit card registered under the name William Hart. That card was the same one flagged during the alias search, and when I tried to trace it, it took me through a dizzying maze of reroutes. A VPN ping from Amsterdam, then one from Argentina, then one buried deep in a Caribbean node. Every hop clicked into place like teeth on a gear. This wasn't a criminal improvising. This was a man who had built an entire shadow identity with professional precision. I took the card number and ran it through an international banking lookup tool, which only airline staff technically had access to. The card originated from a tiny offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. The kind that didn't ask questions and definitely didn't cooperate with law enforcement unless someone kicked down their vault door. My chest tightened. I was way out of my depth, but I kept going. One by one, I reconstructed his travel routines. A pattern emerged. Sterling always left the U.S. for Geneva. Always. Never Paris. Never London. Never Rome. He landed in Switzerland like a homing beacon. But he never stayed in Geneva. His layovers were short, too short for business meetings. Then, within an hour of landing, he boarded a smaller, privately chartered plane under a different alias, heading toward a forested region in rural Switzerland. Private airfield. No cameras. No customs. No public record. Perfect hideout. I circled the routes on a map until the office wall looked like a conspiracy board, red lines and pins everywhere. My hands trembled from caffeine and fear, but there was something else sparking, a thread of purpose I hadn't felt before. Maybe for the first time in my life I was doing something that mattered. When Ramirez returned, she stood in front of the map for a long minute. Finally, she let out a low whistle. A lot of high-level financial criminals use that region. Old banking laws, old money, old secrets. If he's hiding anything, money, identities, people, it'll be there. I expected her to congratulate me, but she didn't. Instead, she crossed her arms and looked at me like she was seeing past my skin. "You've got good instincts," she said. "But understand something, Melvin. Men like Sterling don't leave crumbs by accident. If you're finding this much this quickly, it means he wanted to disappear the moment he finished using you." Her words sank in like cold water. I wasn't just helping the investigation. I was following the steps of a man who had planned every detail long before I ever met him. And he knew I'd look. As I stared at the map, Something in the pit of my stomach twisted, because the closer I got to the truth, the more I felt Sterling already knew I was coming. I didn't realize yet that someone else had been watching me dig, and they were already on their way to silence me. Ramirez called me into her office early the next morning, her expression harder than usual, as if she had spent the night wrestling with something ugly and mean. She closed the blinds before speaking. That alone made my stomach twist. "Sit down, Melvin. You're not going to like this." She slid a thin folder across the desk. Inside were documents, NOT police reports, not robbery logs, but old financial records, newspaper clippings, and a grainy photograph of a much younger Arthur shaking hands with someone whose face had been blacked out with marker. "Arthur isn't who you think he is," Ramirez said. "He wasn't just buying and selling buildings. He built his first fortune through offshore asset movements, some of which were flagged as illegal transfers, shell companies, tax fraud, money laundering investigations, all quietly dropped after settlements." My throat tightened. I felt like the air had thickened around me. "So you're telling me the 27 million wasn't clean," she finished. "None of it was declared. It's money he couldn't report stolen without incriminating himself. That's why he's avoiding us. And why is he avoiding your mother?" The room felt suddenly smaller. I thought of how proudly Mom had shown off the sapphire necklace Arthur gave her. How she believed she'd finally found someone stable, someone safe. I felt sick. That afternoon, I went straight to my mother's apartment. She sat at the table, still in her robe, eyes puffy from tears. When I asked her about Arthur's past, she sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose like she'd been dreading this moment. "He told me once," she said softly, "that he had enemies, people he'd wronged in business, people who'd wronged him. But I didn't ask. I didn't want to ruin it. I just wanted someone who cared." Her voice cracked, and guilt stabbed through me. She hadn't been naive, just tired. Tired of men who promised everything and delivered nothing. But the truth was unavoidable. The robbery wasn't random. Someone had known exactly what Arthur kept hidden, where he kept it, and how to get to it. When I returned to the precinct, Ramirez was already waiting with another file. "We found something else," she said. "Arthur and your mystery man, Sterling Vance, whatever name he's using, they weren't strangers." She opened the file to reveal two names listed on an old business registration from 25 years ago. Arthur Hargrove, Elias Vance. I felt heat rush to my face. "They worked together?" "For a short time, yes," Ramirez said. "In a major international deal that collapsed. One of them walked away. One of them went to prison." "And the records?" I asked. "Sealed," she replied. "Someone, Arthur or Van, made sure their past stayed buried." The pieces clicked together with cold precision. Sterling wasn't just stealing money. He wasn't just running a fraud. He was settling a score at 25 years old. He had played me, used me, and manipulated me not just because I was convenient, but because I was close to Arthur. It wasn't about the cash. It was about revenge. Ramirez leaned back, studying me. "Melvin, this isn't just a robbery. It's a chess game between two men who ruined each other. You're caught in the middle because Vance knew you were the weakest link." Her words stung, but they were true. I wasn't just chasing a criminal. I was unraveling decades of secrets, some belonging to a stranger in a suit, and some belonging to the man my mother thought she loved. And I had no idea yet how deep their connection truly went, or how far Vance was willing to go to finish what he started. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Not physical. He was the same woman who'd raised me on double shifts and stubborn pride. But the heartbreak had carved something out of her spirit. She sat at the dining table surrounded by unopened bills and printed emails from Arthur's lawyers. Her savings, every penny she'd scraped together for the past 10 years, had been funneled into Arthur's safe ventures. Now those investments were frozen, maybe gone forever. She tried to smile when I walked in, but her lips trembled. "I should have known better," she whispered. "Men like him, they don't choose women like me unless they want something." "Mom," I said gently, "this isn't your fault." But deep down, I knew we were both carrying guilt that didn't belong to us. We spent the afternoon sorting through Arthur's things, boxing items the police had cleared, and leaving the rest untouched. His expensive suits, his imported briefcases, stacks of unread financial journals. It all felt hollow now, props from a life built on secrecy and control. My mother folded each item slowly, tenderly, as if she were burying the remains of a relationship she still wished had been real. While clearing the hall closet, I spotted an old cardboard box shoved behind a stack of winter coats. Dust coated the top so thick it looked like the box hadn't been touched since before I was born. Curious, I pulled it out. Inside was a large leather-bound photo album, its cover cracked and faded. "Mom, did you know this was here?" I asked. She shook her head. "Arthur never showed me any old pictures." I carried it to the table and opened it carefully, the pages sticking together from age. The first few photos were harmless. Arthur at business dinners, Arthur standing beside luxury cars, Arthur smiling with politicians whose names I vaguely recognized. But 20 pages in, something made my skin crawl. There was Arthur, 25 years younger, hair slicked back, smile sharp and arrogant, standing shoulder to shoulder with another man. A man whose face ignited instant recognition. Different hairstyle, slightly broader nose, a thin scar above the right eyebrow. But the eye, cold, calculating, piercing, W-air the same. Mr. Sterling. Under the photo, written in neat ink, was a name, Elias Vance. My breath stopped. My pulse roared in my ears. This wasn't some coincidence. Sterling didn't resemble Vance. Sterling was Vance, rearranged, reshaped, reborn. Plastic surgery. Identity change. Maybe more than once. I flipped through more pages, each confirming the nightmare truth. Business trips. Celebrations. A partnership that had once looked promising. Until suddenly the photos stopped, and the next page was blank, as if their entire history had been wiped clean on purpose. I felt cold all over. "Mom, this is him, Sterling. Or Vance. Whatever name he's using now." She leaned over, gasped, and pressed her hand to her mouth. "Arthur said the man he betrayed would never forgive him." "This wasn't a robbery," I whispered. "It was revenge, and he's been planning it for decades." The realization hit me so hard my knees went weak. Vance hadn't used me because I was convenient. He had used me because I was connected to Arthur, to my mother, to the one weakness Arthur never saw coming. Family. I grabbed the photo album and ran to my car. My hands shook the whole drive to the precinct. I burst into Ramirez's office, slamming the album onto her desk. "You need to see this," I said, breathless. Ramirez flipped to the key photo. Her eyes widened in a way that told me everything. "Melvin," she murmured. "You just uncovered the missing link." But neither of us yet understood just how much darker the truth was about to get. Ramirez paced her office like she was trying to wear grooves into the floor. The photo album lay open on her desk, the image of young Arthur and Elias Vance, now Mr. Sterling, staring up at us like ghosts resurrected from a past neither man wanted anyone to uncover. "So it's official?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ramirez stopped pacing. "Yes, Sterling is Elias Vance. He disappeared after serving 15 years for international fraud and racketeering. And guess who testified against him? Arthur Hargrove." She tapped the photo. "Your mother's boyfriend." The room seemed to tilt. "So, Vance didn't just stumble into Arthur's life?" "No," she said flatly. "He's been circling Arthur like a shark, waiting, planning." She pointed to a stack of documents she'd printed from financial forensics. The $27 million he stole wasn't random. That was the exact amount Vance claims Arthur cheated him out of, plus accumulated interest. "Interest," I repeated. "Like this was a debt?" "More like a vendetta spreadsheet," Ramirez replied. "Vance believes Arthur ruined his life. Now he's returning the favor." I sank into the chair, gripping my knees. I'd known this was revenge, but not that it had been measured to the dollar. The precision chilled me, but Ramirez wasn't done. "Melvin, listen carefully," she said, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a razor-edge whisper. Vance didn't just steal money. He used Arthur's stolen assets to set up a financial trap. Offshore accounts, fake transfers, hidden tax filings. He moved the stolen funds in Arthur's name. My breath caught. But that means Arthur is about to be arrested, she said. Tax evasion, money laundering, fraud. He can't report the theft without admitting the money was illegal to begin with. And now all forensic trails lead straight to him. I felt nausea climb up my throat. He's been framed. Framed using his own crimes, Ramirez corrected. That's the genius of it. I stared at the wall, trying to breathe. Vance hadn't just used me to steal money. He'd used me to identify every weak spot in Arthur's life security codes, routines, blind spots, and even emotional vulnerabilities. I'd handed over pieces of a puzzle I never knew existed, and Vance assembled it into a weapon. He played me, I whispered. From the day he smiled at my counter. Ramirez nodded once, almost sympathetically. He studies people, finds their insecurities, uses their ambitions. You weren't the first. But my mom, my voice cracked. She didn't know anything about Arthur's past. She didn't know she was living with a man who'd built his life on lies. Your mother, Ramirez said gently, is collateral damage between two predators. The words hit like a punch. Arthur had lied to her. Vance had used me. And now she was left with nothing. No savings, no partner, no safety. Just heartbreak and a stolen sapphire necklace that had been the only moment of joy she'd allowed herself in years. That necklace was all she had left of the man she thought Arthur was. And Vance took that too, because why not? Destroying her was just another way to hit Arthur where it hurt. I clenched my fists, a hot, shaking anger filling my chest. I spent my whole life feeling powerless. But not this time. Not when my mother was suffering because two men couldn't let go of their pride and greed. I'm going to get her necklace back, I said, my voice steady. I don't care what it takes. Ramirez studied me. Then understand something. Retrieving that necklace means getting close to Vance again. And Melvin, he knows you. He anticipates you. I know, I said. But he underestimated me once. She sighed. Just promise you won't go after him alone. I didn't promise. Couldn't. Because somewhere in Switzerland, sitting in a chalet funded by stolen lives, Elias Vance had something that belonged to my mother. And I was done being used. I was ready to fight back. I didn't sleep the night before the flight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vance's face. Murking, confident, untouchable. The man who'd played me like a cheap instrument. The man who'd dismantled my mother's future without blinking. Ramirez met me at the airport, her jaw tight with worry. Swiss authorities are on standby, she said. But Melvin, once you're up there in the mountains, you're essentially alone until they get the signal. I know, I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. This is the only way. She studied me for a long moment. Don't let him get inside your head again. Too late for that, I thought. He'd been in my head for months. The flight to Geneva was uneventful, though my heart never slowed. Using my airline contacts, I blended in as staff, just another courier moving discreet documents for wealthy clients. That part was true enough. My badge and uniform looked official, my clipboard even more so. A private transport arranged by the Swiss authorities drove me toward the mountains. The deeper we went, the colder the air felt, not just temperature-wise, but spiritually. Like even the wind knew something dark lived in these hills. Then the forest opened. Vance's chalet stood on a cliff like a crown, leaked glass, stone walls, and silence thick as ice. No neighbors, no movement, just isolation and wealth soaked into the soil. The driver dropped me at the snow-covered path and left without a word. My breath fogged as I approached the door. I knocked twice, and then he opened it. Sterling, Vance, Elias, whoever he was now. He wore a cashmere sweater, not a wrinkle on him. His hair was perfectly styled. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes low-locked instantly onto mine. A slow smile curved his mouth. Well, he said, amused, if it isn't my favorite ticket agent. I swallowed the fear tightening my throat. I brought something for you, I said, holding up the courier envelope, our excuse for contact. He stepped aside, waving me in. The warmth of the chalet hit me like a slap. A fire crackled. Glass walls revealed the sweeping Alps. And on the desk, casually displayed as if it were a cheap trinket, lay my mother's sapphire necklace. The rage that surged through me almost made me dizzy. Vance walked to the desk, leaning casually against it. Stacks of bearer bonds lay spread out like playing cards. "You've caused me quite a headache," he said. "The police are sniffing around. Ramirez is digging where she shouldn't. And then you, flying all the way out here. Admirable. Stupid, but admirable." "You used me," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort. "You used my job, my trust, my family, just so you could settle a score." He chuckled. "You call it using. I call it strategy." He picked up the necklace, letting it dangle between two fingers. "Ambition blinds people, Melvin. You wanted success so badly you ignored every red flag. You practically volunteered your loyalty." My hands balled into fists. "You ruined my mother's life." "Oh, please," he scoffed. "Your mother attached herself to a criminal. I simply adjusted the scales." My anger boiled over. "Give me that necklace." He laughed. Loud, cruel, delighted. "Or what? You'll take it from me? Do you even understand who you're dealing with?" I stepped closer, heart pounding. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." He leaned in slightly, voice dropping to a predator's whisper. "You should be." A heavy silence filled the room, thick and dangerous. We stood inches apart, the Alps stretching endlessly behind him. For a moment, it felt like the entire mountain held its breath. The standoff had officially begun. I felt the weight of the tiny recorder in my jacket pocket long before I needed it. Ramirez had pressed it into my hand before the flight, her expression deadly serious. "He'll talk if he thinks he's winning," she'd said. "Men like Vance always talk when they think victory is inevitable." She was right. As Vance leaned back against his polished desk, basking in his own arrogance, I let my fingers slip inside my jacket and clicked the recorder on with the smallest movement of my thumb. The faint vibration told me it was live. Every word he spoke now was evidence. "You ruined your own life long before I came along," Vance said, adjusting a stack of bearer bonds with casual arrogance. "Your mother latched onto a man built entirely of lies. You latched onto me because you wanted shortcuts. You're all the same." "You stole everything," I said, breath uneven. "No," he corrected, almost gently. "I took back what Arthur stole from me, and I added interest." His voice dripped with satisfaction. He wasn't just confessing, he was bragging. He described the robbery in detail, the forged credentials, the inside routes he'd developed using my information. He even explained how he'd routed the stolen assets back into offshore accounts under Arthur's name, constructing a financial noose Arthur could never escape. Every word soaked into the recorder. And then he paused, looking directly at me. "You know what the funniest part is?" he asked, stepping closer. "You helped me. All along, Melvin. You opened doors I couldn't touch. You made it easy." Something in me snapped. "You used me," I said, my voice rough. "Used you?" He smiled. "I elevated you. You should be thanking me." The words barely finished leaving his mouth before he lunged. It happened fast, a blur of motion, a rush of cold terror. He grabbed my jacket and slammed me into the edge of the desk. The impact rattled my teeth. Instinct took over. Years of grabbing luggage, handling heavy bags, and lifting awkward loads. Suddenly, all those motions translated into survival. I shoved back hard. He stumbled, knocking over a lamp. The chalet echoed with the crash. Vance roared, pure rage twisting his face, and charged again. His hands clamped around my throat. The room blurred. My lungs burned. I clawed at him, reaching blindly for anything. My fingers brushed metal. The sapphire necklace. I ripped it off the desk and swung the chain across his face. He recoiled with a snarl, loosening his grip just enough for me to twist free. I grabbed the recorder with my other hand and ran. But Vance was faster than I expected. He tackled me near the doorway, dragging me down. We rolled across the wooden floor, struggling for control. He pinned me, fist raised, and then the chalet exploded with noise. Shouting, boots pounding, a flash of blue uniforms. Swiss police stormed in like a flood breaking through a dam. Freeze! Vance froze for a fraction of a second, long enough for 2 officers to grab him and slam him onto the floor. He screamed, thrashing, spitting curses in every language he knew. His threats filled the air, wild and desperate. You think this ends me? You think you can stop me? I built this world. But he was done. They dragged him out of the chalet. His voice faded into the freezing air. I sat there, shaking, the necklace in one hand, the recorder in the other. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to relief, but it was heavy, bittersweet. Later, back at the Geneva precinct, I placed the necklace gently in Ramirez's hands. She listened to the recording in silence. When it ended, she exhaled slowly. "This is enough," she said. "Enough to bury him. Enough to protect Arthur. Enough to protect your mother." I nodded, exhausted. Justice, I realized, was never clean, never simple, never painless. But tonight, finally, it felt real. The flight home felt different. Not lighter, just quieter. As the plane carved through the clouds, I finally allowed myself to breathe in a way I hadn't for months. The adrenaline had faded. The fear had settled. And what remained was the strange, unfamiliar calm of survival. Elias Vance, Sterling, the man who'd worn a dozen faces, was gone, extradited, shackled, awaiting trial in a federal courtroom with enough recorded evidence to bury him deeper than the mountains he had tried to hide in. For the first time, the world would see him for what he truly was. Not a mentor, not a businessman, not a polished ghost of wealth, but a criminal who had spent decades sharpening revenge into a weapon. Arthur didn't fare as cleanly. Ramirez called me a week after I returned. "He's avoiding prison, thanks to your recording," she said. "But his empire is gone. His reputation is radioactive." Arthur had leveraged everything, his properties, his connections, his name, to keep himself afloat. And now, stripped bare, he was a man with nothing left but guilt. He and my mother ended things quietly, without drama, without screaming. My mom told me she needed clarity, not chaos. And for the first time, I saw her as someone rediscovering her own strength rather than leaning on someone else's. She moved into a smaller place. She got a new job. She built routines from scratch. And when I visited, she smiled real smiles, the kind that didn't depend on someone else's fortune. As for me, returning to the airport should have felt like a step backward. But it didn't. The terminal lights didn't feel suffocating anymore. The rush of passengers didn't overwhelm me. Standing behind the counter, scanning IDs, saying "have a safe flight," it all felt strangely grounding. Because I wasn't the same man anymore. I wasn't just a ticket agent. I wasn't the kid who fell for easy promises. I wasn't someone who believed success came from proximity to power. I had become someone who fought back. Someone who uncovered the truth. Someone who had looked a monster in the eyes and refused to run. One night, after a long shift, I sat at my old wooden desk and wrote my university application essay. Not about grades or achievements. Not about ambition in a pretty, polished way. But about the ethics of trusting the wrong people. About how ambition without integrity becomes a trap. About how self-discovery often comes through fear, guilt, and facing the wounds you helped create. I wrote about my mother, about the necklace, about what it feels like to carry a responsibility you never asked for. I didn't hide how close I came to losing everything, my job, my future, myself. I sent it in, and a month later, a thin envelope arrived. I got in. The acceptance letter felt unreal in my hands, proof that even broken paths can lead somewhere worth going. That evening, I sat with my mother at her kitchen table. The sun poured through the window, warm and gold. I placed the sapphire necklace gently in front of her. She touched it with trembling fingers. "Melvin, I never thought I'd see this again. It's not Arthur's anymore, I said. It's yours, because it doesn't represent his wealth. It represents what you survived. She cried, quiet, relieved tears, and I realized that giving her back that necklace wasn't closing a chapter. It was opening a new one. I still had fears. I still had doubts. But I also had direction, purpose, a future I'd built honestly, painfully, completely. For the first time in a long while, I felt strong and brave enough to admit just how close I came to losing everything. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit that like button and share your story in the comments. Subscribe to follow my journey as I build a life founded on truth, not lies.